Rich Wilkerson is the pastor of Trinity Church in Miami, and he ministers to 4,000 Spanish, Haitian, and Caribbean people each week. His church is known for doing the impossible in the midst of dire poverty. Pastor Rich knows the miracle-working power of prayer firsthand, the same power that once raised his infant son from the dead.
Rich Wilkerson is the pastor of Trinity Church in Miami, Florida. He's been in the ministry for over 40 years. When his son Graham was 6 months old, he had a grand mal seizure and died. Doctors were only able to resuscitate the boy after 10 minutes. Then they told Rich and his wife that their son was brain damaged due to a lack of oxygen. That's when the couple asked their friends around the world to pray.
Please welcome to the 700 Club, Rich Wilkerson. It's great to have you with us, Rich.
Thank you, too.
Tell us about the day that Graham died. What happened?
I was in Daytona Beach. Those were the days when we used to have charismatic clinics, and I was speaking at a conference in Daytona Beach. My wife was in Tacoma, where we lived, and I got back from the evening meeting, and she called me on the phone. There was no cell phone, and she was broken. She said, Graham's in a deep coma. He died on the way to the hospital. I was going, whoa. He'd had an ear infection, and the doctor missed it. He was on amoxicillin, but he should have done a spinal tap on him, and he did. Wow. He missed him. So he had gone in.
What was the
spinal meningitis?
Spinal meningitis.
Yeah.
Wow.
And on the way to the hospital, he went into grand mal seizures. He was 6 months old.
Oh, my.
And so then when she got him there, he died. She's there screaming code blue, and there's all kinds of noise. And so they did cut downs on his ankles, got shunts, and got blood going again, and they came out, I wasn't there, came out and said, if he lives, he'll be a vegetable. You should pray, Mrs. Wilkerson, that he dies. I know you're religious people. You should pray that he dies. Well, we're not into praying for death. We're always into praying for life.
And
so
that was because he'd been dead for so long, they feared
10
brain
minutes,
damage.
and they got it back, so they were sure. So I flew all night. By a miracle of God, I got an all-nighter. Came back to Tacoma, got there, and there he was. We started a 16-day vigil.
Wow.
And 6 days later, they had surgery to put shunts into his head. And but one day, a nurse was coming through and dropped a tray of plates right next to his crib, and he jumped and started screaming. When that happened, the nurse began to weep. I thought it was because she dropped the tray. She went, he can hear. Because you should lose your healing with that. And then we found out that, he was going to make it, came out of there, and that started the long process.
Rich, when you were in that place where the doctors gave you such a dire prognosis, how did you and your wife pray during that time?
Just constantly. And of course, we're Pentecostal people, so we prayed a lot of stuff. We didn't know what we were saying. We just kind of just praying. It was just a nonstop vigil for 16 days. We lived at the hospital. We had friends, Dr. Cho had Prayer Mountain praying for us. Wow. James Robinson Ministry had people praying all over the world. I mean, just every major ministry. I'm sure 700 Club, we'd let 700 Club, everybody was praying for Graham.
So what happened?
Well, he just came out of it. We took him home. He was on phenobarbital for a year. After a year, he was weaned off. Never, ever had another seizure, ever. He's the healthiest of my 4 sons. He's now 27, has a driver's license. We'd never let him drive, thank you very much. But he does have limitations, but he does the computer very well. He's got 2 rap albums out. He dances. I mean, amazing kid.
Unbelievable. What an answer to prayer for you all. Talk a little bit about the church that you pastor in Miami. It's quite an unusual congregation, and God's called you to a really deep work there.
Yeah. We have an organization called Peacemakers, and it started with church planting in '94 in urban centers, predominantly African-American. We got this call to Miami. I knew I was going to have to build a prototype, because what I was wanting to do in the inner city wasn't working the way I'd envisioned it. We got this church in Miami. We came to the church in Miami. They accepted us, about 250 Haitian people. And we just started. And it's such a long story. I mean, we're talking about giving blood, literally. But, all these 16 years later, It's rock and roll. I'm telling you, it is all the way.
How did what you learned in prayer through Graham's very dire experience impact the prayer that was needed to grow this church that God placed in your life?
There has to come a place in every believer's life where, not on my watch.
Yeah.
No, there's no
Where you
losing
just
here.
stand.
You know, one of my dear friends, Brian Houston, said recently, sometimes you win and sometimes you learn.
Yeah.
You never lose as a man or woman of God, never. Paul said in 2 Corinthians 2:14, now thanks be unto God, who always causes us to win.
Yeah.
So there's a prayer of tenacity that God, I'm in for the long haul if you'll help me.
I like that.
All right? I'm not giving up.
Yeah.
And that was the same kind of prayer we had for Graham to live that we did in building this church.
God had already put a great spiritual lineage or legacy in your family. Talk a little bit about that.
Well, you know, funny because, not funny, but I leave from here to fly to Fresno for my father's funeral. And he's our patriarch. But the truth is that he is the uncle of David. They were raised as brothers, David Wilkerson. Yeah, just 2 years apart. So they were kind of raised as brothers, but that was the feel. When I was a little boy being raised in West Palm Beach, David would come down and stay in our home for 3 weeks at a time.
Wow.
Because he was dying with ulcers. That's when you thought that milk products were good for an ulcer. So he would hose vanilla milkshakes and milk product soups. But I'd hear him praying in the room next to me all night, God, give me New York, give me New York. And so when we went to Miami, all I could do at night, you know, Terry, was God, give me Miami. Because I remember my cousin David praying, God, give me New York. Yeah. So that's all we've done is say, give me Miami. So, but our whole family is very vested in the call of God. Whatever he wants, we're in.
Yeah. I love what you had to say about tenacity, because I think there are so many people today who find themselves in difficult circumstances financially or with family members that they're waiting on to come to truth and reality of Christ in their lives. What word would you have for them today?
Well, you know, the Apostle Paul just said, I press toward the mark. And a press is just a forward march.
Yeah.
And, you know, Jesus talked about two gods in the New Testament.
Yeah.
God and money. You can't serve both.
Yes.
So if your eye is on money for your source, you're dead in the water. But if your eye is on Jesus, he'll provide the resources to see the vision through. Sometimes vision is just to be healed of cancer right now.
Yeah.
Sometimes it's just to get my marriage back together. If he's your source, he'll bring whatever resources to see that happen. That's what we believe.
Well, Rich, our condolences on the loss of your dad.
He's
Not
with
really
Jesus.
loss, he's with Jesus, but what a legacy he's left behind with you. And
Incredible.
it's wonderful to have you with us today.
Thank you
you
so much, Terry.
What a
God
great
bless
word
you.
you bring.